Good morning, everybody. So before I get going, I'd just like to mention that all the work that I'm going to talk about today is part of an ambitious water resources modelling project that's being carried out between regulators, academic researchers and consultants. The project has been commissioned by RAPID, who are the Regulators Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development, and the project is being delivered by a team of academic project partners and consultants. That team is being led by University of Oxford, but also includes University of Bristol, Doug Hunt Consultants and Helen Gavin at Ricardo. And the Environment Agency is supporting the project with a group of water resources modellers. DAFNI have provided the computational platform for the project and really have built the foundation upon which the project has been developed. So I'd like to begin with just a quick overview of the challenges that water resources face in England and some of the recent changes in policy. So back in March of 2020, the Environment Agency published the National Framework, and this set out the strategic water needs for England across all sectors out to 2050 and beyond. And it endorsed two recommendations that were previously made by the NIC back in 2018, the first of which was to reduce leakage by 50% by 2050, and the second was to increase the resilience of public water supplies in England from a resilience target of 1 in 200 to a resilience target of 1 in 500 by 2030. The government has taken forward both of those recommendations and included it in the National Infrastructure Strategy, which was published in December of 2020, and those recommendations have therefore become statutory and policy. And what this all means is that the government has clearly recognised that there's a need to increase the resilience of public water supplies in England and also ensure that public water supplies are resilient to additional pressure from population growth, climate change and protecting the environment. And in order to do this, we need to develop new major supply options and also ambitious demand management as well. And just to give you an idea of the size of the challenge, if we don't do anything between 2025 and 2050, we will have a national deficit of around 4,000 megalitres of water a day, which is obviously quite sizable, and this is the jaws of death you may have heard James Bevan speak about before. So in recognition of these challenges, Ofwat have put forward £500 million worth of funding available to the water companies for them to develop strategic infrastructure schemes so that they're construction ready in the 2025 to 2030 period. And it's also set up RAPID, the Regulators Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development, to oversee the process. The RAPID timeline is shown on the slide here, and there's a series of gates that the strategic solutions need to go through. And this aligns with the current round of Water Resources Management Planning, so WRMP 24, and also new for this round, we've got the regional planning component. In terms of the solutions themselves, they're shown on the slide here, albeit schematically. There are 6 new reservoirs, 6 long-distance water transfers, 5 water reuse options, and 1 combined supply option. And by and large, you can see that they're large scale in their nature, and generally the purpose is to join the system up in a more integrated way. And obviously associated with each of these solutions, there are a number of risks and opportunities. So deciding what the best combination of solutions looks like, what the right portfolio looks like, is really a trade-off between 3 variables, as Jim mentioned before, this trilemma, if you will. One is the affordability or the cost, another is the environmental impacts or maybe even the environmental benefits, and then the third is around the security of supply aspect, whether that's to drought resilience or to additional pressure from population growth and climate change. There's obviously a balancing act between all these 3 variables. There's a best value set of solutions out there, and the water companies and the regional groups are doing their own modelling and assessment of this through the WRMP process. But it's also important that regulators have an independent view on this. So Ofwat are looking at the affordability side of things, the Environment Agency is carrying out an environmental assessment of the risks to the environment. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is really the security of supply piece and some of the national water resources system simulation modelling that we've been doing to help give us an insight of the drought resilience benefits associated with the strategic solutions. We call this project the National System Simulation Modelling Project, and it's got 2 aims. The first of which is to give regulators a shared and independent insight on the benefits, dependencies and the risks associated with the strategic solutions obviously in terms of drought resilience, and also, secondly, to provide a national kind of holistic view of the strategic solutions and identify any trade-offs between them. In terms of approach, there's a few points that are worth teasing out here. One is that the national modelling approach is really just a different way of looking at the same problem. It's more of a national, large-scale, top-down view compared to the more detailed bottom-up modelling that the water companies and the regional models are doing. But that said, the national modelling does not replace the more detailed company and regional modelling. The idea is that these things will work in combination, and the national view could raise particularly interesting questions that the more detailed modelling from the companies and regions can then investigate. And in terms of ways of working for this project, we've worked collaboratively and transparently with water companies and solution teams to make sure we've got an appropriate representation of their strategic solutions and also the water supply system for the relevant parts of the country in the model. You might be wondering why use a national scale model, and there's two reasons that stand out really specifically around the strategic solutions. One is the size of the strategic solutions means that if we want to assess their in-combination benefits, then we really need a model with an appropriate scale that captures those large-scale system interactions. So for example, if you've got a water transfer that moves water from the north of the country down to the south, that might then interact with a reservoir. And to capture those interactions, we need a national scale model. Another reason is due to the spatial characteristics of drought. And again, due to the large-scale nature of the solutions, it means that especially long-distance water transfers are likely to be more susceptible to widespread and spatially correlated drought events. And therefore, again, we need a national modelling tool to assess those sensitivities and that behaviour. In terms of the model that we're using the Water Resource Model of England and Wales, which we abbreviate to RWE. This model was initially created for the Marius project and subsequently was used in the 2016 study by Water UK and then more recently in 2020 by the National Framework. The model runs in the WAFNet software, which is of course hosted on the DAFNI platform, and the map on the slide here gives you an overview of the topology in the model, and as you can see it captures quite a lot of the large-scale water supply infrastructure, such as reservoirs, surface water abstraction, groundwater abstractions, and the connectivity of the system. In reality, the model is more complex. The screenshot in the red box here is a screen grab from the user interface from WAFNet, so there is more detail behind this. As with all models, it's a simplification of reality, but that said, it does cover about 90% of England and Wales's population, around 80 catchments and 70 water resource zones, and all supply sources greater than 2 megalitres a day are represented in the model. And obviously we need to get an understanding about whether the results from the model actually make sense, and the way we've gone about doing that is carrying out a national validation exercise by comparing the simulated storage from RWE, the national model, with the simulated storage from water company models. An example of that is shown in the bottom left of the slide here for the Elan Valley Reservoir, and you can see the storage profiles compare quite well, which means that we can have at least some confidence in the model outputs. In terms of the latest results that have come out of the project, there's three that are worth mentioning. The first is that the strategic solutions act to increase the drought resilience for key areas of water stress in the east and the southeast of England, and also that the solutions can maintain the drought resilience in the face of additional pressure from more ambitious environmental protection, the risk of not achieving targets for reducing PCC or consumption and leakage by 2050, and also more severe climate change. And then finally, there are no notable impacts between the donor and the recipient areas, except for perhaps some sensitivities around the Minworth reuse solution, but this is only really during rare large-scale drought events where we see potentially less water availability for some users on the lower part of the River Trent. All these findings have been written up into a phase 2 report, which we're going to be publishing later this month, and Anna Murgatroyd from the Oxford Research Group has prepared a paper that's been submitted for review that includes all of these findings. Now I just want to move on to talk about how DAFNI has really helped the project and ensure it's been a success. And the first point is really an obvious one, but the national modelling team is a virtual team. We sit in different organisations, but also in distinct distinctly different geographic locations across the country, as shown by the map here. And quite simply what DAFNI does, it just joins the dots. So it lets us work together, it provides a virtual workspace in which we can collaborate, and without this we'd have to obviously set up, each organisation would have to set up its own, its own modelling and computational systems. The second way in which we've worked with the DAFNI platform and the DAFNI team is really around streamlining workflows, and we've done this in two ways. The first of which is that we're using the Weather at Home climatology dataset for the modelling, and that contains 100 30-year replicates for the near future and the far future ensemble of the model. And what this means is if you run the model manually, you've got to run it 100 times, which is obviously quite a time-consuming and onerous project. And we've worked with DAFNI to use the batch mode, which quite simply just means that we can run all those 100 replicates in one workflow, and obviously that's a much more time-efficient way of working. And the other way in which DAFNI's really helped to streamline our workflows is around the way that we handle our scenarios. So with the model, we're testing quite a lot of scenarios. There's an example here shown on the scenario table. And there's 9 in total, but each one of these we're running 100 times. And what we've done is we've worked with the DAFNI team to set up a loop function that essentially boils this down into scenarios that have the same model topology or different input data, or different model topology and the same input data. So instead of running 9 workflows, we can effectively just run 2, which is again a much more, it's a much more time efficient process. Another way in which DAFNI's helped us is to provide a bit more of an end-to-end solution or an integrated way of running the model. So when we first started using DAFNI, our process looked a little bit like this. We were really just using it, the DAFNI platform, just to run the water resources model. We're doing a lot of the pre-processing on our desktop machines or local computational resources. And again, we're downloading all the results from DAFNI and post-processing them on our own machines. And what we've done is we've worked to improve this process. So now all we really use DAFNI for is just creating the model file on our desktop machines, and we use DAFNI for everything else. So we use DAFNI to run and create the inputs, we run all the pre-processing scripts, we run the model on DAFNI, and also we explore the outputs from the model using the DAFNI system, so running post-processing scripts just to help with the visualization. So this process has a number of benefits. Obviously, there's a time-saving component. We're not uploading and downloading data constantly. There's less overall storage is used, so we've not got the same data set sat on multiple hard drives in multiple different locations. And I guess finally as well, there's less chance of human error because we've got one instance of each of these components. It means that there's not separate permutations that have been potentially edited by different people. The last bit I want to draw out really about how DAFNI's helped us is around visualization and stakeholder engagement. So as I just mentioned, in terms of the visualization on DAFNI, we run post-processing scripts to generate some of the example plots that are shown on the slide here. And obviously this requires a degree of, the user being, up to speed with coding and being familiar with the more technical aspects. But we're working with DAFNI to simplify this and make a simple user interface that higher level stakeholders can go in and explore and engage the results. And this has really helped us make the project and the outcomes of the project more accessible to different stakeholders. Finally, for me, just quickly some next steps. In terms of the national system simulation modelling, we're going to carry out a phase 3, and that will look across the drought resilience of different combinations of options, and also looking at some further work on investigating the widespread droughts and the implications of those on the strategic solutions. And obviously we'll be combining the outputs from the modelling with information from costs and environmental risks to get a more complete or holistic view on the solutions. In terms of future things that we plan to do with the modelling, I think it'd be good to add more variables to optimise, so move towards a more multi-objective optimization, so including things like carbon cost, environmental flow levels, and obviously there's more things we could do there, including scenarios for other sector demands, which are obviously going to become more important as we go along, whether that's for things like hydrogen production, but incorporating the implications of those in the water resources model. There's synergies to be made with other modelling projects, whether that's within the EA or more widely, for example, flooding and the use of reservoirs for storing floodwater. And also thinking about regulators' water resources modelling strategy. So we've previously done some work with Julian Haru and his group here at Manchester, setting up an aggregate type national model, and we think that we could link the aggregate type model with the more complex system simulation modelling that I've talked about today to come up with a broader modelling strategy. In terms of DAFNI for the next steps, it's really about the post-processing scripts that I just mentioned, and obviously about exploring the integration with other models on DAFNI. So there's a whole wealth of other models and data on DAFNI, and yeah, there should be some ways that we can link the water resources model into that. Okay, I think all that remains to be said is thank you for listening today, and also a massive thanks to the DAFNI team for supporting the project.